Hi, and welcome back to Education in Focus, where today myself, Jason, and Lisa are having a chat about how to promote a positive relationship between home and school. We will be having a think about how, as parents, we can ensure that we build a team around our children. And if you have any experiences you'd like to share, then please feel free to contact us at education@adoption-focus.org.uk. So, Jason and Lisa, where do we stand on relationships between home and school? Because it used to be that home was home and school was school. Is that where we still stand, or have things moved on, do you think?
I think things have moved on. I think it's quite complicated. To some extent, home and school is actually quite a good thing. I think we'll probably talk about that in a little bit as well, because there are certain situations I think that's really healthy and important for the children. But overall, the research shows that if parents and schools work well together, then the children benefit. It has a great impact on them, and that obviously sounds sensible, really, doesn't it? Um, and I suppose the main issue for us is that a lot of our children may have additional needs, which require extra attention from the school, and it needs us to work closely with the schools to make sure that they're doing the right thing. And with the best will in the world, the schools aren't always going to know the children well enough or understand their issues particularly, and that's one of the big advantages of being able to support your children through the school and having that great relationship.
Yeah, I mean, I always used to think of it as a three-way relationship. For a child to be successful in school, however you deem success, like whatever that is for you, whether it's happy, whether
Mm,
it's academic success, whether it's, being comfortable making friendships, any, whatever it is that you're measuring success by, for a child to be successful, there needs to be a good relationship between the home, the school, and the child. Those three need to work together. But having said that, I think we do, as parents, need to be able to draw a line between the two and
mm,
to ensure that any problems that they're having at school don't have to come home and affect them on an evening. They can get a break away from it if they find it difficult. They can take their mask off. They can relax. They can, you know, find other things in life to enjoy. And so, yeah, important that we work together, but it not let those lines get too blurred.
yeah, and that's particularly important, I think, when it comes to issues where they've had a difficult day, or if the school's approached you and said, "Oh, can you, they've had this thing happen, this incident happened. Could you have a word with them at home?" Or almost like there's a sense of you feeling you're being asked to re-punish them or re-sanction for something that's happening in
Mm.
school, and that's where I would say, okay, you can smile and nod and thank you, um, rather than being resistant to that as proxy to the school. But you probably smile and nod and then not do much about it, because you just have to acknowledge that you understand for your child they've had a difficult day, and actually their home needs to be their safe place. So you're absolutely right, and that's a case where you might have to say, well, yeah, well, the school has dealt with it. This the situation's gone, and our children don't always have that great sense of consequences anyway, and understanding of the actions that they've had. Sometimes they've moved on as well, or they want to. So yeah, I don't think there's always a lot to be gained from that.
I know we've done a separate episode on homework, but just what you were saying there, Jason, sparked something else in my mind, which is, yes, it's important to do homework. And yes, I do think there is value in it. But also, those aren't necessarily battles that I think we should be fighting every night. My daughter is young; she is only 5 at the
Mm,
moment, but she came home with a book to read, and that was her homework for the evening. And she literally screamed at me, "I don't want to do it. It's like being at school. I don't want to do my learning here." And we were heading for an absolutely massive meltdown. Now, at that point, do I think, no, we are doing the homework and we're supporting the school, or do I find another way to do it and kind of let her enjoy her time at home while still achieving something? So we got a different book out. We read a different book that she wanted to read, and I felt that that was equally fine. But it was just my way of drawing that line between what happens at school stays at school. And in that moment, she really didn't want to think that she was at
yeah,
school. So I thought that's
that's
okay.
that was a
It's not a problem. We'll do something
that's a
else.
good outcome then, wasn't it? Because actually, she still read.
Yeah.
So it may not have been the reading as such. It might have been the school book, because it's a school thing. The schools maybe do it, and maybe there's that sense of control as well by having a chance to choose another book. You're still saying to her that reading's important and valuable, but um, not necessarily fighting a battle just to insist that they have to do this book. Yeah, so that
Yeah.
was a good one. But yeah, it's difficult. That's an example of a real classic dilemma, isn't it? Of what would you do? You don't want to seem to be backing down every time for every single thing where it may not be appropriate. It's very difficult. So that was a good one.
I think, I wanted to kind of ask both of your opinions on this. Is when we talk about, not blurring that line between they've had a punishment at school, really do we need to bring that home and battles that we pick? Do you think it's important for our parents, especially, to think about that in context of how long has their child or children been at home, and how established is their attachment relationship as well? I guess, is that something for them to be thinking about?
Yeah, so I think that's important because, as I say, it's about feeling safe and secure, isn't it, with home? That's they need to know from you that you are there for them regardless. It's unconditional, and you still love them, and that's not dependent on the sort of day they've had or what someone said about them. So, um, yeah, I think that's absolutely appropriate.
100%, and definitely in the early days, but no matter really how long our children have been with us, I think it's fair to say that in some schools they won't be getting pacey responses,
Mm,
or they won't be getting enough pacey responses, and so therefore we should really, really try and go for the acceptance and the empathy, so that they know, as Jason said, that they are accepted and loved unconditionally. Um, and then follow up with some curiosity. And, we can start to unpick perhaps why things didn't go well that day, but definitely prioritizing that attachment in, well, always prioritizing that attachment, but definitely in those very early days.
yeah. Sometimes if the younger ones, particularly, that some children start just opening up at random points when you're not really expecting it. It comes in the bath, chatting to you from around the corner, or get the pajamas on or something like that. Sometimes he'll just pop into conversation, and that's the moment you sort of capture it. But yeah, um, that's absolutely right. Prioritizing that sense of safety and security. I mean, obviously, we're not saying you don't have firm boundaries and expectations at home. We all know that their routines are really important for them to feel safe and secure. But that's about your routines and not what's happened at school.
Brilliant. Thank you both. And I know we've mentioned a lot throughout different episodes that ideally home and school should be co-parenting, um, but at kind of very least what we want for our children is that positive relationship. So do either of you have any tips on what we can do as parents to promote that positive relationship? And I guess if you wanted to look at it from a primary perspective or a
Hmm.
secondary perspective, if they're different.
I think there will be lots of differences. Just the nature of the schools, aren't there, Lisa? I mean, in a secondary school, everything's just massive, and there's so many people involved. I can imagine it's a completely different challenge.
It can be, but I think that getting yourself organised at the start of the year is really, really helpful to get the academic year running well. And sometimes, children know in maybe like June or July what their timetable is going to look like for the next year, who their teachers are going to be, and that's brilliant. 'Cause it gives you more time to kind of get yourself organised. But ideally, at the start of the year, I'd be wanting to know who are the key people in the secondary school that are going to be working with my child. So that would be the form tutor, probably would be the one who has the overview, would be the one that hopefully will see them every day, will be the one that kind of gets messages about how they're doing in different areas. So I'd like to know who the form tutor is going to be. I'd like to know if the Senko and designated teacher have changed, because quite often you see big staffing changes at the end of academic years. So it's just useful to know if they're the same people. And also, if my child perhaps had an issue with an individual subject, like maybe they find maths particularly challenging, or maybe they don't like their English or PE, again, I'd want to know who those key people are. And then I'd try and work out whether any of those people need a kind of settling in meeting. Obviously, if a child has had these teachers before, you might not think that it's necessary to like have a settling in meeting at the start of the year. But if they are new significant
Mm.
people, I probably would try and get in there nice and early and just let them know a little bit about my child's background, a little bit about their needs, a little bit about perhaps what triggers them, what they found difficult in previous years. And also, really, just to get that message across that I want to work with them to support my child. And if you can get in before there are any problems, then I think that makes it's easier to kind of contact them and work with them should challenges arrive later on in the academic year. So I think for secondary school, just because there are so many people, I'd try and get out in front of it a little bit early, cherry pick which staff are the good ones to know, and if necessary, have that early meeting with them just to try and start that relationship off in a good way. Um, would you say that was the same for primary, Jason, or is it different? Because I know that in primary they have like mainly one member of staff, don't they,
Mm.
for the whole day?
I think the principle's the same though, because I think you want to get to know, or be confident who the main adults that are going to be working with the children are. Um, it might be the teacher. It might be they've got extra support from a member of support staff, and that might be the person that spends a lot of the time with the child. If they, it depends who. If the child's got a particular key relationship with somebody already, and that person might know your child or really well already. But if they don't, yeah, you're absolutely right. We've got to get in there and just help them to understand what your child needs and how they function and the difficulties they might have and how it presents, because the, often the schools will interpret things in a behaviourist way, not understand it's possibly a trauma informed way. And I think bringing back the question that Leigh was asking about as things to do, I think one of the jobs is advocating, isn't it, on behalf of the children? Like this is what the purpose of that meeting is really, that you're saying, and possibly some education. If you've had lots of training around pace and trauma informed practice and attachment, then you might be in a good position. But it might be that the staff you're speaking with don't have that. If they do, that's brilliant. But if they don't, they're going to need a little bit of guidance and support, possibly in a non in a non-patronising way. Here's a list of here's a list of instructions of how to look after my child, please. Just sign the bottom. You wouldn't necessarily do that.
Yeah, I find a good way of kind of broaching that conversation is perhaps to share some things that work well at
Yeah,
home
yeah,
or things that don't work quite so well at home.
definitely.
You know, this idea, definitely in secondary schools, this idea of like detentions or kind of isolation rooms can be quite prevalent. So we might choose in that very early meeting to share the fact that, when we respond in similar ways at home, that isn't very successful. We find it starts a shame cycle, which can be
Yeah,
incredibly difficult to break. What we find much better is when we do this. And that way, like you say, you're avoiding that kind of like patronizing, telling a teacher how to do their job, but also giving them some tips that actually this might be a better way of approaching.
that's a really good
Um,
point. Yeah, yeah. I think being proactive is absolutely essential. In a primary school, it is easier to have those incidental conversations. I think just by the nature of things that beginning and end of the day. But I still think it's important to agree what form of communication you want, or what the school does, or what you think is going to work for you and your child. It might be a quick chat at the door is enough. It might be there's a messaging system the school uses, like Class Dojo and other things, where there's a two-way sort of messaging that's allowed. Emails to the office, for example. I don't know. There's so many options. For some children, if they find being at school a struggle, and it might be that they have a period of time where it's a struggle, then it stops being a struggle, particularly at the start of a year. Um, some schools can use little things like chat books, where some members of staff write a few notes in it around some big things that happened during the day. And really, what you're trying to get out of that is it's not just a series of, oh God, this happened, oh, and then she did this, and then she did that, and then she fell out. So, that's going to be a whole host of negative things, which isn't going to help really. It's going to give you a sense of doom sometimes. Whilst you don't want to be completely shielded from the things that have gone wrong, it's also understanding there's some of the things that went well. Just a few brief notes is probably enough. Because sometimes our children will come home with a very negative view of the day, and I didn't have enough to play with, and nobody did this, and I couldn't do that. And then if you look at the notes, well, actually, look, didn't you do? And it can kind of trigger a slightly different conversation, which helps to challenge that perspective. Um, but also, the chatbot's quite helpful for you to put notes in about if something's happened that morning. You think, oh, I'm just late. She's just woken up. Didn't have a good night's sleep. Not going to be great. Might be a bit grumpy, etc. Just a few things that someone might want to know if at the start of the day. They can be fine. That doesn't have to be. There are other ways of doing it, but chat books are one example of how to do it. But I think when you do that, agree how long you're going to do it for, because it can be quite a lot of work for the members of staff and for you. And the child might, and some children don't like them because they might feel that it's that sense of I'm being talked about or being written about. Um, and they sometimes try and hide them or destroy them or throw them in the bin, that sort of
mm.
thing, which is a bit sad, which is understandable. But often I've seen staff sitting with the child and writing a couple of notes. Oh, I think you should put that in, that you did this. Really, oh, that was worrying you, wasn't it? Should we write that down for mummy? We'll make sure that they know. That also helps them to feel like that their worries have been understood and acknowledged, and so that can be a positive. So again, it all comes down to how they use as well.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about that, and I've not seen chat books used in secondary school. And initially, when you started talking about it, I was thinking, well, that could be quite manageable actually, because you can just write a couple of lines at the end of each lesson, and it would be a, not a very onerous way on kind of like communicating between all the teachers involved and home as well. But then it also puts a lot of responsibility on the child, because they would have to carry it around with them every day, and
Yeah,
they would have to approach the teacher at the end, and it can single them out a little bit to be, oh,
yeah,
can you write in my book? But that would be the only way that it would work, I
mm,
think, in a secondary school, was if the child took some ownership on it. But that could be very difficult for them, especially if
yeah,
they are having a bad day. But going back to your original point, agreeing how that communication is going to work and what form it should take is really important.
mm,
Um, and thinking about what's manageable for everyone. I certainly have been in situations where I've been asked to email every day feedback about a child, and then it became very aware that because the parents were busy, they weren't looking at my emails every day or replying to them. I'd get a reply once every four, and I'm thinking, well, why am I doing this if I need to?
yeah,
But at the same time, if you want a full feedback from secondary school, you're going to be having to contact a lot of teachers. So it might be best to go to the form tutor and ask them to collate some weekly feedback for you. But again, recognizing that they might have to approach 10 to 15 teachers for that feedback. So, it is a task that can be done, but it's not going to be a daily task. It
no.
might be a weekly task or a fortnightly task, so that you can actually get something meaningful out of it. That's
I
one
suppose
way
it
it could be
depends on the
done.
purpose of the chat book, isn't it? If you
Yeah.
think that you need to know more about what's going on, then that's where it's helpful.
Mm. Again, in secondary school, just thinking about it, it might be that you only really feel that you need to talk to one teacher. Like I said before, maybe things are
Mm.
generally going okay, but there are repeated issues in maths. So actually, then you are just wanting to talk to the maths teacher, and you can sort out the best way to do that will suit you both.
I think whatever you do, though, one thing I always say is to it's difficult sometimes to do this, but to try and be friendly and consistently positive. Hopefully, you feel that way anyway about the school or the staff that you're working with. I know it's not always the case and not on every day, but try to give that. It's about putting on a front as well. You're almost trying to be professional in another sense. I know the school are being meant to be professional members of staff. They're supposed to be approaching you in particular ways, but it also helps to have that poker face sometimes. I think we've used that expression a couple of times in other podcasts, haven't we? Because it can really help work wonders, I think, particularly if you've been given some negative news about your child, because um, you can end up reacting emotionally immediately to something. And often staff will feel nervous about the situation because if they know that your child's struggling with things and worried about what reaction you might have, they'll be feeling slightly on edge as well. So a smile just reinforces that I'm here. We're all on the same side. Look, we're working together. I know it's hard for you.
That's really true. We talk a lot about emotional regulation, don't we? And, how we talk about how we can help our children to learn to emotionally regulate themselves, but we need to check that we're regulated. And we also have to be aware that perhaps the staff
Mm,
aren't regulated either. There may be 101 things going on in their day or their lives that we don't know about. But also, they might be feeling genuinely bad that they're not doing as well as they could be with your child. That might really knock their confidence because their
mm,
strategies aren't working. So they might not be emotionally regulated either. And what I would say is, yeah, try and employ that poker face. um, and even if you need to buy yourself a little bit of time to kind of regulate yourself so that you're not coming at it emotionally, you can kind of get yourself back in check. That's fine. So, I hear what you've said. Would it be useful if we had a chat about this tomorrow? Would it be useful if we spoke about this later in the week so we can take the time to talk about it properly? And it may be that they say, oh, actually, it's not that big a deal. It's fine, in which case, we can kind of move on. But if it is something that needs a bigger conversation, then making sure we're all in the right place to have that conversation is probably helpful. So poker faces until we're in in the right space is really useful.
yeah, and if they want to have a chat there and then, in the moment, at the end of the day, if it's been difficult and you're not in a place to take that conversation, you've got to be honest and say, I'm really sorry. I'd love to, and I think it's really important, but not now's not the right time.
Yeah,
Can we
100%.
arrange a time? Because that, you know, partly for the just the reason that you know you want to be sort of clear-headed enough to be able to manage it. And if your child's still looking dysregulated and struggling, you're going to have to focus your energy on them, aren't you?
Yeah.
Um, so it's perfectly reasonable to say, "I'm really sorry, but no, not I can't at the moment." And you'll have everyone will have a better conversation at the end of it, won't they? If you've had a chance to breathe and collect your thoughts together and actually get an understanding of what's happened.
Well, that's it. I mean, I know we're going to talk about, what we can do if things are not going quite so well, but one of the things we do want to avoid is the blame game. And if neither party is in the right place to kind of be having a solution based conversation, then actually we can get stuck in the blame game. So yeah, if we feel that we're not in a position to have a proper conversation about it, thank you very much. That's really important. I think we definitely need to have catch up about it, but I can't do it right now.
Yeah, it's difficult. This is brings on to another dilemma I think that people often find, which is um, trying to maintain a positive outlook about the school in front of your child is where possible. Acknowledging and reassuring where things have not gone well for them. I'm not saying you've just got to brush it aside. That's not true. But um, if you are feeling frustrated and upset and annoyed, but particularly by it might be individual members of staff, for example, it's so tempting to mutter and groan and moan about them, but your child will be picking it up and they'll be taking it in and thinking, "Oh yeah, that's true," or that's just going to undermine a lot of the work that you're all trying to do. So it's often best to try and
Yeah.
Or lead to some very awkward moments of, well, my mum or my dad said you are.
Well, I've seen it I've seen it play out a number of ways though. Like there definitely have been children who've walked in the past and said to a member of staff, "Oh, well, my mum and dad say you're useless, or I don't need to listen to you,"
Mm.
which causes problems in itself. But we've also had children who have come in and apologised for their parents, saying,
Wow.
"Oh, my mum and dad don't like you very much," and that can put our children in a very difficult situation
Mm.
if they feel that because they have to go in and work with these people every
Yeah,
single day,
exactly.
and that our children are often very adept at doing what they need to do to survive, so they might be going in feeling that they have to try and keep this relationship going with the teacher, and will throw throw the parents under the bus, as it were, just to kind of like keep that going. But then I've also seen children just completely withdraw
Mm.
because they won't be confrontational about it, they won't be apologetic about it, but they just don't have any way of building that relationship with a teacher when they're getting that negative reinforcement at home. So I think for those reasons, we don't want to be making it any harder for our children. So trying to be positive, trying to, acknowledge that things aren't going well, but we are working together
Yeah,
to try and
that's
make
it.
it
And
better.
if something has blatantly gone wrong, let's say, from your point of view, the school's made a poor decision, perhaps. There's nothing wrong with saying, I think someone's made a mistake here. I don't think this was the right decision in this case to your child. And I'm going to help make sure this gets fixed. But you're not saying this teacher's awful, this person's terrible, and they're useless. They don't have a clue. It's a different way of saying it. There's a mistake that's happened. Someone's made a choice. Now you might feel it like underneath. You might be thinking, waste of space. This person is. I don't know, but you just got to try your best to avoid it. It just doesn't help anyone. Say it to someone else.
So fake it until you make it.
Yep, number one.
It
Yeah,
works in lots of other situations, doesn't it? So I think sometimes it has to be. It's stressful though. I think it makes it difficult for you. You need that space somewhere to be able to vent those things, though. You do need to be able to let off steam somewhere. So hopefully you can.
absolutely. No, it's really key. So we kind of we've got some ideas of what we should do and some about what we shouldn't do. So let's not get into the blame game or say anything incriminating about school or staff in front of our children. Is there anything else? And you've obviously said not going to school dysregulated and having those chats when we're not in a place to have them. Is there anything else as parents when we're trying to promote and build this positive relationship with school that we should avoid doing?
I
Mm.
think I've got one that's kind of like something we should do and something we should avoid. They're kind of very closely linked, and that is the idea of um, trying to respect and follow their policies and procedures, and not kind of go at it in a different way. All schools will have policies and procedures about how they communicate with home, how they want to support children, how they want to encourage positive behaviour, how they want to support academic success. what to do if there's a complaint. All of these things will be documented, and it's really useful if we can follow those and engage with them, uh, because that will help us to get our voices heard quicker, but it also allows us to
Yeah.
challenge things when they're not going well and get our voices heard quicker as well. So I'm not really sure I've made that point particularly well. Jason, do you want
You did. You did.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
That's fine. I mean, we've got to expect that school's going to have to follow its procedures and policies, and we're going to have to, as much as we can, respect that. There's going to have to be some leeway potentially in some cases, particularly around the way that behaviour is managed for some of our children, and that's quite obvious, and that we know that. Um, but overall, we've got to respect that. I think when people choose a school, if there's any choice in the school, they've got to acknowledge those procedures are in place. But they're there for a reason. They're there to make sure that everyone's treated in a fair and consistent way, at least in theory. So that, then they generally do work well. Um, I think one of the things I'd say definitely avoid doing in terms of anything else is just don't leave things to build up. If things are starting to worry or niggle at you, it could be tempting to think, oh, I don't want to be a pain. I don't want to go up to the school about every little thing. It just seems pointless. I'm sure they're going to think I'm a right moaning Minnie or something. Um, you really need to say straight away, I think, and make it clear that it's a small thing, but it could build up to something bigger, and make it and because it doesn't help anyone to get things building up. Because apart from anything else, your child might be continuing to
Mm.
suffer in some form. You're going to get increasingly wound up if it's not getting resolved, and so by the time you do say something, you're going to be feeling quite fed up and maybe not responding in the way you'd want to. And it's not helping anyone. The school might be noticing something's wrong, but hopefully they'd have approached you as well if they've noticed it. So yeah, don't leave things to build up.
There can be that temptation, can't there, to leave it to parents' evening or something like that, because that would seem like a really good time to
Yeah.
raise it. But as we discussed in our episode on parents' evenings, you have a very limited time and often in a public environment. So
Mm-mm.
planning to leave things until a couple of months down the line is not useful,
No.
because A, things are getting worse, and B, that couple of months down the line might not be the most appropriate time to raise it anyway. So no, definitely going in and you know starting that communication as quickly as possible. But, and I know this was something that you mentioned earlier, Jason, in our chat before the podcast, is
Mm.
to avoid having conversations in public about our child, and to avoid having them in front of the child. And it's something that you might need to kind of check the school about. Certainly
Mhm.
when I pick my daughter up, there are a myriad of conversations happening as all the parents are picking up the children, and some conversations are not appropriate for that type of
Yeah.
environment, either because of the parents are around, or the children are around, or our own children are around. And so if we feel that it isn't appropriate to have the conversations in that public environment, we need to kind of say, I think it's better off if we have this in private. You know, I we need to be quite clear on that, because, well, no one likes hearing a teacher
No, of
say
course I
negative
don't.
things about them, do they? Or no one likes to be put on the spot. So I think we need to protect our
Yeah.
children
So
from
that
that as much as
that
we can.
classic, oh, can I have a quick word, please? End of the day, someone says, oh, hang on, what's happening? And if you think it's going to be something, well, so this happened at play at lunchtime or something, and it may well be appropriate for you to know, but it just in front of other people, and your child will squirm and possibly start acting up because they're just not very comfortable. And it's almost like they're expecting you to sort of turn around to the child and then almost have a word. It's almost like that repunishing again. There's almost some kind of expectation. You feel under the pressure, don't you? So yeah, I think it's hopefully though, like we said, if we've got in there earlier and had these conversations with the school, said this is how I think we should work together in ways of communicating. This really helps. This doesn't help. They might hopefully avoid doing that. Um, so yeah, those are not helpful.
I think, sorry,
Think,
I was just going to
oh,
say, I
go on.
think, like you said, it is so important to have that outlet, that space to vent. But I guess I would really urge to parents, or try and stress, please don't use social media as the platform for that vent
Oh
or
God,
that
no.
outlet, because we're going to remove ourselves so far away from promoting a positive relationship if we do that.
Yeah, because and also if you stray too far down that road, and if you mention particular members of staff in a social media post, you can actually get yourself into trouble.
Hmm.
The school can get you in a meeting and actually ask you to remove that post, and they can take action if things got particularly extreme. Um, so yeah, it's just definitely not a good idea. I mean, it's very tempting, but vent on the
Yeah,
phone to somebody if you really have to, but
yeah.
best not
It's
doing it
about
like
that
that.
modelling as well, isn't it? Of how we conduct ourselves online and modelling that to our children, and also how we build positive relationships, how we kind of resolve conflict. So all of it is also an opportunity to teach our children those really valuable skills that we
Yeah,
want them to
right.
have.
It is.
Yeah. And I think by venting an awful lot of things on social media and trying to find people who agree with our views on there, what we're essentially doing is moving into that blame game again. We're trying to place blame solely with the school and do it in quite a public environment, but it's not focused on finding any solutions at all. It's very detrimental to having a good working relationship, and isn't going to achieve a positive outcome. So, yeah. Other areas to vent, obviously, your support network is a brilliant one, but adoption focus is another good one as well. Contact adoption focus and let us know the problems
Mm,
that you're having, because I'm sure there's something that we can do to help.
yeah, I would say it kind of brings me on to another thought, things to avoid doing, which is especially if you're fairly new to a school, um, or new to a year group. Let's say if you just changed year groups, just be very careful relying on hearsay from people who might talk about, other parents, for example, who might talk about the school or members of staff, no matter how convincing it might seem, because um, it can really colour your judgment before you've got to know them, and it's not always true, despite everything. And in fact, things have gone wrong. Things may have gone wrong for them, and they don't go wrong for you, and it is a completely different experience. So, got to be really careful with that. I'm thinking of times as ahead that I think in conversations with parents that once said to me partway through a year, oh, she's doing really well. She's so pleased with Mrs. So and so. We thought she's going to be really strict, and we were told she's really mean and she doesn't talk to kids very nicely. It's not true at all. I said, no, but just the point. Don't listen to that stuff because it's not. You shouldn't. It's just not true. There's so much of that gossip that flies around. It's terrible.
It is, and in my capacity as head of department, one of the real eye openers for me was um, realizing that in the same way that all children are individuals, all teachers are individuals as well, and they can form really good relationships with some children and not quite so good relationships with others. And so, I'd regularly have perhaps conversations with parents where their child wasn't fitting in with a particular teacher and they were making very nasty complaints about this teacher. But actually, I knew that they were the favourite teacher of other
Mhm.
students, and I'm not saying it was okay that you know the relationship was breaking down in that instance. But what I'm saying is, if you listen to hearsay, it might just be that they didn't work as well together. But your child might be different. Your child might get on with them. Your child might really excel in their class. And so I think getting to know them, which was your
Mm.
initial point there, Jason, getting to know them, getting to know how your child and that teacher interact and how they work together and what they can achieve together. That's really important before listening to the hearsay of perhaps things that have happened in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. Just take people as you find them. I always think it's just general
Yeah.
good rule in life, isn't it? Actually, but it can be certainly true in school. Just look at what actually is happening, and if, don't just all rely on that sort of stuff. Um, I think a thing to avoid is definitely the classic thing is not going straight to Ofsted and straight to the highest authority as soon as something has gone really awful wrong. You've got to follow, like we said before about following procedures. There's always a procedure around complaints that you need to follow. Ofsted are not interested in most complaints; they just won't take them.
No, agree. And you're going to get a quicker response by working with the school than you'll get from Ofsted. So, you know,
Yeah,
um,
unless there's a massive safeguarding issue that Ofsted might need to know about. They will not take it on. They will pass it back to the local authority, possibly, or just send it back to the school because they'll want to know that. I think they'll just ask, "Has this happened? Has this happened? Have you done this? Have you followed step 1, 2, 3, 4, etc." And if you haven't, then clearly it's not. They're just not interested. They couldn't possibly cope, could they? Because think about the thousands of schools and the thousands of people that might have issues at any one time. they'd be
So that's
swamped.
probably a really good point then to start thinking about, well, what do we do if this informal conversation isn't working?
Yeah,
What do we do if we're feeling, I'm going to contact Ofsted and I'm going to make a complaint, and we know that we're not going to do that because they won't listen and they won't act upon it. So what do we do? What is step 2 if this informal conversation isn't working?
You took the question right out of
I
my
know. We've just swapped
hey,
roles there, Lee. Sorry, sweetheart.
mouth.
I
it's
just
all
passed
right.
it back to
Team
Jason. So
teamwork. All right, okay. Um, well, the first thing you need to do is, I think, ask for a meeting, and ask for a particular date and time, or ask for some suggestions of dates and times around when it's convenient for everybody. Um, First thing to do, make it clear from the outset what you want to try and get out of the meeting. Um, and when it gets to the meeting itself, I do think you really need to have someone taking notes. Really
definitely.
important. I have to say that just from experience, in school and how useful it was to have notes to come back to, and B, from parents that have been supporting families sometimes through this role, and unfortunately they've all been very nice, and the school's been nice, everyone's being lovely, but what you find is they've had lots of these sit down meetings. Things have been agreed and nodded and said, yeah, that's a really good idea, let's do it, and then it doesn't happen, and then the few months later they're thinking what's going on, so then having another meeting, and they find they're doing this sort of thing over and over again, repeated meetings and saying the same things and never quite getting anywhere with it, and yeah, everyone's still smiling and being lovely, and it's all a bit awkward. And parents sometimes feel a bit difficult because then clearly things aren't quite working out very well there, and they have got a good relationship, but ultimately we've got to sometimes be professional about it. And I think from day one, if as soon as you want to sit down meeting, just want to know, you're not saying it's a formal complaint, you're just saying it helps everyone. You can just sort of say, oh, I'm terrible at remembering stuff, I'd really appreciate some notes so I can remember what, because
Yeah.
you may have actions as well as the school. There may be things that you need to do in terms of, you might be agreed to have some conversations with your child at home about something that's going to happen in school that the school's going to try. So that's where it's important. But I think, yeah, have copies of notes, because if things are not working out, you can come back with them and say, well, we agreed this, what's happened about it.
I think that's it. I think, definitely be taking notes. If possible, spend a little bit of time before that meeting thinking about what you want as an outcome. What do you think would be a good outcome from the meeting? Because if you're aware of what you want, then you can talk about that and not leave it, not leave the meeting
Yeah,
feeling dissatisfied because perhaps they haven't come up with the idea that you were thinking of. So perhaps come up with a few strategies that you think could be helpful, the kind of actions that you want to get out of it. Make a note of them before you go in, so they're in your mind. You can kind of make sure you address them within the time that
yeah,
you've got available. And then always the last thing to do before you leave is kind of say, right, can we just reiterate everyone's actions as a final point here? So, following from today, I'm going to be doing X, Y, and Z. You're going to be doing this, and agree a follow up time to say
mm,
when we can discuss progress on those actions. Because I sometimes feel, as you were saying, Jason, in schools, these things can kind of drift a little bit. Everyone's well intentioned, everyone's well meaning. You have a
mm,
conversation, it's nice, you talk about it, but then things don't necessarily change, or perhaps people's eyes go off the ball and it just drifts a little bit, and you have another meeting which is very nice, but I think if
mhm,
we can be a little bit more focused and driven about it, what do I want out of it, let's make sure we talk about it in the meeting, let's make sure we all go away with actions and we all have a date that we're going to come back to it and discuss it again. I think it's keeping people focused on the outcomes that you want. So
yeah. Sometimes asking for a quick review in a week or two is actually appropriate.
yeah.
You may not want to gather, if it's a meeting with a few members of staff, then obviously that's going to be quite difficult to ignore, to organise. So you may agree that you're going to come back in, let's say, a month's time, 6 weeks, to see if a strategy is having any impact. But you may want to ask for a quick informal chat in a 2 weeks' time to see that the sort of building blocks are in place for something. Let's say they're going to start a new strategy, so that you can be confident it is starting to happen. Because you don't want to wait until the 6 weeks down the line and then they've said, well, this happened and that happened, and now we've just started it, so you've like kind of lost 4 or 5 weeks, and you think, oh, good grief, what's been going on? And there may be perfectly good reasons for it, but it would help, because in the meantime, if your child's still struggling, then you're not sure what's going on. You're just left in the dark, aren't you? So yeah, I think sometimes a quick a fortnight later, quick brief chat. How are things going? What's going on? And maybe that something is they've just started trying something, and you just let us know if it's starting to work. Is it starting to settle in? Is it okay? And you can give them a bit of feedback of how things have been from your point of view. See if things have felt a bit more settled or positive. It just creates the evidence trail.
And I mentioned before about talking to Adoption Focus, and either us or your adoption agency if it's a different one, but we can help with that process. So I mentioned before, giving us a ring if you need to vent, but through that
Mm,
process of venting, it might be helping you to regulate a little bit and to think about what the possible solutions are so that you can go into that type of meeting with a clear idea of what you want out of it. So, if you're struggling to think about what would be a satisfactory resolution, then there is help and support out there to help you with that. Um, and also, if you find that you've had a couple of these meetings and things aren't moving in the way that you want, then again, it's something that your adoption agency, you know, we have the wonderful Jason here, who's our education advisor, and I'm sure other adoption agencies have similar in place as well. So, yeah, there can be support through that if you find this route isn't working.
yeah, and we've just given all that advice about going to a meeting feeling prepared and wanting you having some solutions and things. But if you feel it's a bit much as a parent, if you feel like you're kind of driving this meeting, you'd hope that really the school would have someone saying those things. But if you felt that you were driving it all, and you felt it, perhaps you're feeling emotional about the situation, that things that are going on for your child, and it's difficult. You don't feel that you have to carry that burden. It's your adoption support worker can help with that. And some of the meetings I've been involved in, this adoption support worker is the one that's been chairing it in effect, and driving it forward, and that really helps. I think takes a bit of the pressure off the parents.
We do recognise and we do hear from parents, it can be incredibly difficult managing difficult relationships with schools because,
Mm,
if you're living your life, you've got your family things to think about, maybe work things to think about as well. There's an awful lot going on, and trying to get this positive relationship with school and trying to help things move forward is another thing to do, and it can often be quite a difficult thing to do. So
yeah.
yeah, if it's something that you're struggling with, then having a post-option support worker to help with that is perfectly appropriate.
Now, one thing I would definitely say as well, following on from all of that, is that quite understandably people are reluctant to follow a school's complaints procedure, but I would actually encourage people to be we're prepared to do that if they have to. So if we've kind of gone through almost like almost in through this discussion, we've kind of discussed like how a complaints procedure works. It always suggests informal chat, moving into sort of maybe a meeting with somebody, and if things are still not going well, I would definitely get the policy from the school's website and start thinking about what I need to do next if things are still not working. And because again, people feel like they might be disrupting that relationship somehow by doing this. Um, and again, I've talked to people, parents, and who very understandably have just left it and didn't want to do this because they felt like they're pressing the nuclear red button or something by going this far. But actually, it probably needed to happen. It's not to say that this is not a disruption of this relationship. It's just a following process. And if you've done all the other things like we've talked about, and if you've got meeting notes, you've got evidence trails that support what you're saying, and if things are, let's say, if you've got clear examples of things that are just not being done according to agreed actions, then it's perfectly reasonable to then take it another step forward. It will help. Sometimes from a school's point of view, it can actually help bizarrely. I've actually asked a parent once to set one. I remember an incident where I did ask remember as a parent to write one. I said, please, could you write a formal complaint about the situation because it will trigger. Because if you look at the policy, these things have to then happen, so it'll trigger something to actually happen. So we can sort it out more quickly. Weirdly enough, and not very often you want to invite one, I have to say, but there are
No.
situations where you know everyone wants it sorting out, and I think like Lisa was sort of mentioning earlier about being solutions focused. So in all of this, you're just trying to find an answer. You're not just trying to get at somebody, but because of something that they've not done very well. It's very much about finding a solution and making sure it's recognised. And yeah, the thing about the formal complaints is that they will have agreed timescales by which responses have to be done, and you'll get things in writing again.
It's obviously quite difficult doing this podcast because we're talking about, possible issues, but, every situation, every school is completely unique. Every child's needs is unique. But, in the case where perhaps one solution might come through effective use of the Pupil Premium Plus, if it's something that keeps getting passed off, then following the complaints procedure would kind of help to get that highlighted further up and perhaps help those decisions be made more quickly.
Mm,
So, as Jason said before, it's not pressing the nuclear button, it's not, disrupting the relationship beyond repair. It's following the due process to perhaps get your needs heard at a higher level. So, it's okay to do.
yeah,
Yeah.
and obviously I'm not saying go straight to it because they'll
No.
equally the school's policy will say, you should follow A, B, and C before you go to D or whatever,
Yeah.
clearly.
But the policy's there, isn't it? Because schools know that they can't get it right every time. As
Mm,
human beings, we can't get everything right for
no, of
everybody
course
all
not.
of the time. So like you said, it's about, taking that approach of let's try and sort this out as a team. And then if you can't, trigger in something that might offer a little bit more support.
Yeah, certainly. And even if it gets beyond that stage, the governors or the board of governors or the trustees can take a step. If you look at the policies, it'll take it to that stage. So obviously, it's not a nice thing to be in that. You don't want to be in that position. I'm sure it's not very nice for you as a parent. It's quite stressful, um, but sometimes it's necessary. If we're always thinking about our child's needs, aren't we?
Yeah. And as parents, we'll always have to be the biggest advocates for our children and what they need.
Yeah. Now, after saying all this stuff, we're getting there to the heavier side of things there in terms of formal complaints, but I still think it's important though to tell the school when when they're doing things right.
Yeah.
Let them know because they
Oh,
might be struggling.
Yeah.
They might need to.
yeah, 100%. Again, just thinking very recently, they made a change in my daughter's class where they were going to reframe it from time out to time in.
Brilliant.
And when they told me that on the doorstep, and I just said, "Oh, I think that's an absolutely wonderful idea. It kind of links into what we're doing at home. I'm sure, this will help her to respond a little bit better." And so I let them know right at the outset when they told me that I thought this was a good thing, and then they've given that kind of positive
Mhm.
um, feedback back that she is responding better, and I've said that I've noticed a difference as well. So it's just reinforcing that I would like you to keep it as a time in, please, because
Yeah,
that's working. So yeah, I make sure I pass that on to them so that this doesn't disappear when they have another change.
I can't tell you how lovely it is to get an email from a parent when they've had some ups and downs and they're saying thank you for something. It could be quite a short one. Um, Often they come to the school office and I've had a few of those where they come to me and then I've printed it off and taken it to the member of staff and said, look, and you should see the smile.
Yeah,
Honestly, it makes them, you can believe the difference it makes to their day. They have this, it's incredible, the massive, powerful effect. So a small thank you on an email, particularly because it's in writing, it just sort of looks,
yeah.
it really does lift somebody. So you'd be surprised how much impact it can
And
have.
also, as we were saying before, not all schools, not all members of staff are trauma informed or aware of kind of attachment issues or anything like that. So, unless we provide that positive feedback back when they are doing things right and
Yeah.
how much we value it, there's no reason for them to know that it's
Mm,
working or know that we appreciate it.
yeah.
And it's one way of helping ensure that those tactics remain in the classroom is if we
Mm,
can kind of say it is having a positive impact on my child. So yeah, that was a really good point, Jason, is let them know when they're doing something well.
absolutely.
Well, that's brilliant, both. Thank you. As always, I think a lot of food for thought. And we really hope that you've enjoyed listening today. And don't forget, there's plenty of other episodes for you to delve into. We'd love to hear from you. So don't forget, you can contact us at any time with questions, contributions, or suggestions at education at adoption-focus.org.uk. And thanks for listening.